It was a hard-fought 2 hours of last night's GOP presidential debate.
9 candidates took the stage just 6 weeks before voting begins. The director of the Marquette Law School poll, Charles Franklin, is back with us tonight.
Hello, stranger.
Again.
Good to be back.
So was there a consensus winner or loser?
I think there was a consensus that there was no clear winner. You see different people spin it a little bit one way or a little bit the other. Rubio either had a good night or a not so good night. Cruz either did okay or not. Trump was either contained or kind of lost it at a point or two. But I think the overall impression looking across the range is there's not any single standout winner, and there's no single standout loser.
Nobody shot themselves in the foot.
There were some things that were maybe problematic, but not big enough to rise to that level. Ben Carson, after complaining that he hadn't been called on, then passing on answering the question, was maybe not a shining moment, but hardly a fatal mistake.
Jeb Bush was one of the candidates who really took on Donald Trump last night. Let's take a listen.
Do you think this is tough and you're not being treated fairly?
This isn't tough and easy.
Imagine what it's going to be like dealing with Putin or dealing with President
Jeb.
Xi. This is a tough business to run for president.
I know, you're a tough guy, Jeb.
And we need to have a leader that is principled.
Tough.
You're never going to be president of the United States by insulting your way to the presidency.
Let's see, I'm at 42 and you're at 3, so
Doesn't matter.
far I'm doing better.
Doesn't matter.
So far I'm doing better. You know.
That worked for Jeb.
I know you are, but what am I?
Well, you know, you too. This was the sort of mixing it up that, you know, we'd been kind of looking for. And I think you saw Jeb Bush here trying to put himself out there as this vigorous candidate going after Trump. And you saw Trump responding in ways that he frequently does respond here. Whether that's enough, though, to change people's perceptions of either Bush or Trump, I think is pretty doubtful. But it did allow Bush to raise some points, in particular about banning Muslims from entering the country, the Trump proposal for that. But you also saw how quickly it devolved into not exactly a high-level substantive debate right there.
And there was another exchange between Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio on domestic surveillance. Here's this.
We are now at a time when we need more tools, not less tools. And that tool we lost, the metadata program, was a valuable tool that we no longer have at our disposal.
Marco knows what he's saying isn't true.
Well, it's not true. That kind of puts an end to the discussion.
Okay, next.
Here what you saw is something that's really quite interesting, though. What is metadata? The people caught up in NSA surveillance of telephone calls know what metadata is. It's seeing who called whom rather than the content of the call. But there's no explanation of that. And as these two senators go off and talk about what is or is not in a bill that they voted for, a lot of voters, I think, would have gotten lost in that discussion. And in fact, I think it was Christie said, well, you guys are talking about stuff that people don't care about or know much about. But it also represented the divide within the conservative movement between thinking that a national security service that follows all of our phone calls is a good thing versus what Cruz voted for, limiting that degree of intrusion as an invasion of personal privacy. Now, with the rise of fear about terrorism, that vote to limit surveillance maybe doesn't look as obviously like a good vote for conservatives. So that's part of the underlying story here.
All right, what's next? Well, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll find out as our conversation with Charles continues.
Welcome back, everyone. We're continuing our conversation, recapping last night's Republican presidential debate with Charles Franklin.
Welcome back. We're going to take one more sound clip here. CNN moderator Wolf Blitzer asked, if the U.S. imposed a no-fly zone over Syria and a Russian plane encroached that no-fly zone, would you be prepared to shoot down that Russian plane and risk war with Russia? Here's Chris.
I would talk to Vladimir Putin a lot. And I would say to him, listen, Mr. President, there's a no-fly zone in Syria. You fly in, it applies to you. And yes, we would shoot down the planes of Russian pilots if, in fact, they were stupid enough to think that this president was the same feckless weakling that the president we have in the Oval Office is right now.
Well, I think if you're in favor of World War III, you have your candidate. You know, here's the thing. My goodness, what we want in a leader is someone with judgment, not someone who is so reckless as to stand on the stage and say, yes, I'm jumping up and down. I'm going to shoot down Russian planes.
Kind of rough.
It is, but I think it represents this interesting divide within the party. Now, Rand Paul is not doing terribly well in the polls, but he does speak for this less aggressive, less intrusive foreign policy, being more restrained. And so I thought right there you see these differences of views that often aren't addressed, especially last night where almost all of the candidates were anxious to show how aggressive they would be against terrorism, whether it was bombing ISIS or forming military coalition for ground troops. You know, right there in that clip, you saw the tension between being the tough guy on absolutely I'll shoot them down versus the wait a second, that comes with ramifications. How realistic is this?
The Iowa caucuses are 47 days away, and mainstream Republican voters really want to get behind one candidate. After this debate, it doesn't seem like the group is going to be thinned at all. Is this whole group going to be in Iowa?
Yeah, I think it will be. You know, we always get a lot of movement in the last month in the polling before Iowa, and so it may well be that there's some polling shakeup over the next few weeks. But depending on which network decides how many people to put on the main stage, I think you'll see basically this group through the Iowa caucuses, and then we'll see if people drop out quickly. The poor guys that were on the undercard last night may not be back for another undercard, though.
You don't think so?
Nobody? You think they might start dropping out?
There's certainly discussion of dropping the undercard event, and if you do that, then that puts more pressure on them to sort of say, what's the point?
And a big Democratic debate on Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
On Saturday, I know everybody will tune in.
I mean, that's...
Well, you know, this is a difference that the Republican debates have gotten big ratings during the week. Democrats have been putting them on Saturday nights, which is not really a high viewership evening.
So no real big changes in the Republican lineup after last night.
I'd be surprised to see them, but of course I'm infinitely surprised with every new poll.
It's always good to be surprised. Charles, thanks for being with us today.
Great to see you, Charles. Thanks so much.
Happy holidays.
Have a good one.